Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. This is our second series now that we have for Coffee and Conversations with Legislators. And what we're trying to do here is to connect our members and the legal community to our legislators and what's going on in Annapolis, not only during the session, but now post-session throughout the year. So you can understand what they've been working on. You can ask questions through the chat function, and we can talk about ways that you can connect with them and stay engaged. So I would just ask that all of you can stay on mute, but as I said, if you'd like to ask any questions, to post them here in the chat that we'll be monitoring. And we are joined today by a great set of panelists. We have Senator Jill Carter and Michael Huff. We have Delegate Vanessa Atterbury and Luke Klippinger, and we will be moderated today by former Senator Bobby Zirkin, who's working in an ongoing relationship with the MSBA on this initiative to stay connected to this community. So Bobby, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks so much, and good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to say thank you to Senators Carter and Huff and Delegates Atterbury and Klippinger, to an incredible panel to talk about the legislative session. Just incredible legislators, all of them in their own right. Mike Huff from Frederick County, Vanessa Atterbury from Howard County, Luke Klippinger from Baltimore City, Senator Carter, Jill Carter from Baltimore City, all experienced legislators with incredible accomplishments. So I'm excited to hear from them and to be able to reach out to the legal community and share some of the accomplishments, things maybe you heard about and saw in the papers, and maybe some things you didn't see that really affect the practice of law in various ways. So with four incredible guests, it's going to be challenging. I'm going to try to do this in a way to give everybody an opportunity to talk and to share the things that were of focus to them. And then obviously the chat room is for questions and so forth. And so we have a lot to get through. So I thought we would start just by asking just an open-ended question to talk a little bit about yourself, because a lot of lawyers, surprisingly aren't as tapped into the legislative process as we think they are. And so just to give an opportunity for each legislator to say, where do they represent, how did they get into politics, and quite frankly, kind of what their focus is in the General Assembly. So I will start, as you always should, with the chairman, Luke Klippinger. It's great to see you, great to have you here. And Luke, why don't you, say who you are and what you've been up to.
Thanks very much, and want to thank the MSBA for setting this up today. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone here. I am Luke Klippinger. I represent the 46th Legislative District, which includes most of South and Southeast Baltimore City, and I'm the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. I've served in the legislature since 2011, and I'm in my third term, and of course, very proud to work with and serve with my vice chair, Delegate Atterbury, who's going to speak here in a moment. In my day job, I'm an assistant state's attorney in Anne Arundel County, where we are back and having jury trials even over the last couple days. They have started to roll out, and we're starting to see some of the challenges that are definitely going to come with reopening our courthouses and reopening them to a huge backlog of cases all the way across the state. As I was mentioning, actually, before the call started, over 3,000 open criminal cases in Baltimore City alone, and needless to say, probably just as many, if not more, civil cases that are waiting for adjudication. So very challenging time for the judiciary, to say the least, but I'm very happy to be here today.
Thanks, Luke. And why don't we just jump back and forth, House, Senate, House, Senate, House, Senate. So Senator Carter, if you could introduce yourself and talk about your day job and some of the things you're focused on.
Thanks so much. First of all, I'm really happy to have this conversation. I think it's an important one, and I hope that we'll continue the dialogue over the interim and as we look forward to what we're going to advocate legislatively next year. So by trade, my day job is I'm a longtime attorney, primarily over many years, criminal defense. I was an assistant public defender for just 2 years back in the late 90s, but people continue to label me often with being a career public defender. I wish, because I think it's a noble profession. But I had the distinction of, oddly enough, in 2003, I was first elected to the Maryland House of Delegates. And at that time, I was the only Black woman attorney on the House Judiciary Committee and in the House of Delegates at that time. Since that time, others have come, and now it's, they're all over the place, a dime a dozen. Those with that background are a dime a dozen everywhere. I would say that I'm the reluctant politician to some extent because I didn't have any real aspirations for politics, but I did want to have a broader field where I could make a difference in people's lives besides the individual client. And as many of you attorneys know, especially when you were newer to the profession, you looked at some of our statutes and you said, what kind of yahoos created these ridiculous laws? And so I saw an opportunity to maybe have some say in shaping laws. End of 2016, I resigned from the House of Delegates. And I will tell you, I was at the height of frustration with how slowly the General Assembly was moving on issues of justice, especially criminal justice reform, police reform, juvenile justice reform. And I decided that it was no place for me to spend any more of my life because they were moving too slowly. That's significant because I was urged to run for Senate when a vacancy came up in 2018. And along with that has come a shift in leadership in both the House and the Senate, which has created a paradigm shift when it comes to these issues of justice, equality, juvenile reform, police reform, criminal justice reform, many of the things I care about and am most passionate about. And so we'll talk more in this meeting and hopefully in the future about some of those changes that were able to happen. I believe they happened because of the paradigm shift, not just in the leadership in the Senate and the House, but in the country. So with that, thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
All right. And Vice Chair Atterbury, good to see you. And why don't you say a little bit about yourself and what you do in your day job and some of the things you've been focused on?
Thank you. Good to see you too. Thank you for having us. I'm Delegate Vanessa Atterbury. I have the honor to serve as Vice Chair to my outstanding Chair, Luke Clippinger. I was first elected in 2014. And so since 2015, I have served on the House Judiciary Committee. And I've been a member of the Maryland Bar since 2000. So I have, in the past, I'm a retired trial attorney. I did trial work for about 10 years. I did family law. I worked for the Attorney General in the District of Columbia, defending the city from just a myriad of cases in just in local court and in federal court. And currently I serve as in-house counsel to a family business where we provide workforce development and we provide people jobs, job training, and that type of thing. And that has allowed me to be in the position in the General Assembly, and it has also allowed me to raise my 3 kids. I was pregnant with my daughter when I ran. She is now, I had her, then a month later, I went to Annapolis. She is now 6. My middle son is now 7, soon to be 8, and my oldest son is 9. So now that the legislature is out, I'm running around to a million soccer practices and soccer games. And so my focus has typically been a lot of domestic violence work, a lot of child abuse work. I do some family law bills, but primarily issues that I say affect women and children, which is considerably everything, actually, but particularly with a focus on child abuse issues. And so I look forward to talking about that with you later. Thank you, Bobby.
All right, thank you. All right, and last but not least, Senator Mike Huff from Frederick County. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. If you saw me run upstairs, I've got 3 kids and 2 dogs here. So I was trying to tell them to keep it down for a couple of minutes. So mute it when I'm not talking. So, yeah, you know the feeling. So I guess what separates me first off is I'm the only non-lawyer on here. So for all the lawyers that look at and wonder why there's so many problems with the law or who the heck wrote this, it's because they allow non-lawyers like me to legislate and write your laws. And I'm the only Republican on here too. So I bring those 2 different perspectives. I guess my background, I went to high school. I graduated with a sterling 2.0 average. So college was not in the cards for me. I went and joined the Air Force. And actually, it was one of the best decision I ever made. They gave me an aptitude test, and it was one of the first times anyone ever came to me and they said, you know what, you're really smart. You scored really high on these aptitude tests. And so I ended up, they said, we got a job for you. We're going to make you a missile mechanic. I thought, well, that sounds great. You know, I'll get to go to Cape Canaveral because that's where they shoot missiles off. And so I signed up, I did my training, and I found out, no, these are the missiles in the silos that are underground, and they're like in Wyoming, Nebraska, and North Dakota. So that's where I was stationed for 4 years. So I guess I'm smart, but I'm not that smart. I didn't figure that out. I enjoyed that. I did 4 years up there at a top secret clearance, and you know, it makes you grow up really quick. So actually, I'm very outspoken on issues that when they talk about when you're 18, you're an adult, in my opinion, because when I was 19, I was old enough to have top secret clearance and sign and take possession of a nuclear weapon. So I was always big when they wanted to ban smoking to 21. I put in the amendment that said military should be exempted. So it's always been a big issue with me. After I got out of the Air Force, I went and just because I saw an article in the Washington Post in Frederick County, the Republican state senator had a big re-election campaign. I didn't know anything about Maryland politics, didn't know anything about him. I just knew I was a Republican. I wanted to volunteer. That was Alex Mooney. He ended up winning. He was reelected, and I went to work for him. He was a member of JPR, and so I ended up. That was 2002. I ended up not running myself to 2010. I went and did some other things, but just a quick, I guess, story about my own personal background with the legal system in that, and you know, what shaped my take somewhat. My father was a very severe alcoholic, and my brother, who's 15 years younger than me, was suffering abuse in the household. I actually did have to engage in the court system and take custody of him and go through legal fights on that. So it gives me a different perspective in that I've, you know, been on the other end of it, and got elected in 2010, was in put on Judiciary, and like I said, I don't have a law degree, but I learned a lot from Joe Valerio. I see him as my law school professor, and what he didn't teach me, I picked up from Bobby Zirkin when you were our chair, and was elected to the Senate in 2014. And you know, I've seen a lot of change in the time that I've been there. It's been, you know, quite frankly, in some ways when I got elected, you know, especially on a lot of the justice reinvestment and the things that I was working on, at some points I was the real moderate, and now at this point I think things have shifted where I'm would be back to more representing today the conservative side of criminal justice.
Okay, so it's great again to have all four of you here. And I know I'm getting texted a bunch, so if I look down, I'm getting texted questions by folks who are listening in. Let me start this way. Obviously, the biggest, highest profile issue of this last General Assembly was police reform, and it's something I know all of you have very strong opinions on and have worked on for many years, some of you. And so let me just start there. And I'm gonna, if I could, just I'm gonna bounce around a little bit, because this is such a big ticket issue, both in the state of Maryland, but also nationally. And I know in the Senate, Jill, Senator Carter, you were leading the charge. In the House, Vanessa was leading, Delegate Atterbury was leading the charge. Stop using your first names. So Jill, why don't you start and kind of talk through your perspective on it, and then we'll bounce over to Vanessa, if that's okay, or Luke or Mike, just jump on in. And this is obviously a big, big issue here. So Senator Carter, go ahead.
Thanks, certainly. So, you know, police reform was a priority of our session, and it was great because I'm very pleased with what was accomplished. And it was really accomplished, in my opinion, through teamwork, through work of the House and the Senate. So I applaud Delegate Atterbury and the work that she did with the House work group, as well as the heavy lifting that we did in the Senate. You know, bills are often reviewed, rewritten, and modified like dozens and dozens of times during the course of one legislative session. And I'd say that happened here because I think that we started out combined with maybe about close to 30 bills. And at the end of the day, we produced a package that was condensed down to about 6 really significant ones. And so the big items of the session, and I'm happy to say I went into the legislative session, and frankly, probably all the way back to about 2012, I've been saying that we need to consider repealing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. I believed that we needed to do it because it set, it provided protections and impediments to accountability for law enforcement officers, and set them on I describe it as a pedestal above other people and other public employees. And so the result of that legislation, whether you consider it repeal, it really reimagined the disciplinary process and revised it tremendously. It created the law that we came out with now creates appointed members of public members of charging committees to charge officers. For those officers that choose to fight their charges, that want a trial board, it now has a majority-led civilian trial board. And then to me, the greatest part is really recognition that we needed something called police accountability boards in every jurisdiction. And so legislation that I worked on, and I just want to say this, it is my belief that the police disciplinary or discipline for police should not be this highly complex thing that's beyond the pale of what any regular citizen could ever do. We allow citizens to sit on juries and make decisions when they don't have training in the law. And I believe that we can do that with policing. And the ultimate goal, I think, ought to be moving in more of a direction where people have oversight over the investigation, disciplinary processes of the law enforcement officers that they pay to serve and protect them. So that was a big deal, repealing and changing the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. It's also a sexy topic to say we repealed the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. We were the first state to create it, and I'm happy to say we're the first state to acknowledge repeal of it. Another big deal for me and for everybody, and for many lawyers maybe, is Anton's Law, which now allows police misconduct records to be disclosable under the Maryland Public Information Act. And that's important because until now, they've not been disclosable. And that's why we often have had officers such as, I often bring up, Wayne Jenkins and Daniel Herschel, who respectively had 40-some and 60-some complaints within the Baltimore Police Department years in advance of when they were finally indicted. But this was never disclosable, and clearly no adequate discipline was rendered because each officer, not unlike many officers across many agencies in Maryland and in the country, were not only not disciplined, but they were actually promoted. And I believe this is an opportunity for us to be able to flag officers before they get to a ridiculous point. I won't talk forever, Bobby. You know, I could spend the whole time on police reform. I won't. I'll just say one more thing. I'm sure that the others, that Delegate Atterbury and Luke and Mike want to talk about this too. So the final one I just want to mention is I'm really pleased with the use of force law that we created, which in my opinion, I'm sure Senator Huff might have some differing views about it, but I think that we created a very strong and very clear definition that we expect de-escalation to be a prerequisite to violence and or force. The fact that our law now created a duty to intervene and a duty to report. In addition to that, we defined force clearly that it must be used only when necessary and it must be proportionate to the threat. And for any violation of these provisions, there's now a criminal penalty, a potential criminal penalty of a maximum of 10 years. And the reason that this is very important is less than 98.3% of all complaints of excessive force are ever ultimately prosecuted and then result in conviction. And a lot of the reason in talking to many attorneys and people over the years is that juries and judges and prosecutors, frankly, find it difficult to prove assault for police officers. And that's a lot of the discussion you also hear about qualified immunity, which we might talk about. But the issue is now, for simply violating our force law, there's a potential criminal penalty. So in some instances, it may not be necessary to charge and just rely upon assault, or like in the case of Freddie Gray, some variation of murder. But now actually a violation of use of force can potentially be a crime. There's many other bills, and I'll leave it to the others to talk about. But those are three very important things.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Senator. And I assume because this took up so much oxygen in the legislature this year, I'd love to hear comments by all four of the panelists, if that's okay with you. I know Vice Chair Atterbury, you led a House work group on this all summer long that we were reading about in the paper. Can you talk about kind of the House's perspective on this and kind of what you thought was good, thought was not so good, wherever you'd like to go on this?
Okay, so I'll talk about kind of how the House approached it, and Chair, feel free to jump in. And I'm going to try not to repeat what Senator Carter already said, because I'm sure all of us could probably sit here and talk about this topic for a significant amount of time. The Senate and the House had two different approaches to tackling police reform, and Chair Clippinger and the Speaker, Adrian Jones, and this is interesting, on May 30th, which was a couple days after the murder of George Floyd, created the House Accountability Work Group. I like to just tell people it wasn't in response to that, because we had so many police reform bills that the Speaker and the Chair had actually already committed to doing a work group, but it certainly sped that process up. But what is interesting is that all of the accomplishments of the General Assembly being out in the forefront of this in the entire country, quite frankly, the pin was put in it after the verdict, the guilty verdict of Chauvin. So we kind of started right after the murder of George Floyd, and that guilty verdict came right after our accomplishments in the General Assembly. And I just find that really interesting. So our approach was, we had a bipartisan work group of just comprised of members of the House. I chaired that work group. I hope the Speaker picked me because I am incredibly hard and diligent worker. I'm a mother raising 3 Black children. And so these issues, particularly when it comes to my boys, and we know these issues now just don't affect boys. You have to worry about your daughters as well. But as young as they are, I mean, I worry about these issues. I worry about them, their interactions with the police, and, have started talking to them about that as young as 4. But I also have a grandmother who's 91, who's a retired sheriff right outside of Detroit, Michigan. So I grew up with that perspective as well. So the work group, I thought, did some amazing work. We met from May to October. We had just 4 tasks, I should say. That was to determine whether or not all jurisdictions should use body cameras, because they were not required to. Out here in wonderful Howard County, we were not using body cameras. We had to determine if there should be a statewide use of force statute, which there was not. We had to determine if we should repeal the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which we, as was already mentioned, we did in fact do that. And we had to determine if there should be an independent investigation and an independent prosecution when there's been a police action that results in death of an individual or serious bodily injury. And that is the one thing that we did not come up with a recommendation. And that is kind of, Bobby, to answer your question, the one thing that the General Assembly did not do was determine, because the House and the Senate did have 2 different takes on that, when there is serious bodily injury or death from a police action, who should prosecute that? And so I suspect that we'll come back and deal with that next session. And so essentially the House came up with 12 recommendations with a lot of subparts. We presented that to the Speaker of the House, and she translated that into proposed legislation. And then through the normal course, the Judiciary heard that legislation, and then the chair put it all in my subcommittee, the Public Safety Subcommittee, where we went for hours and hours on Zoom through all of it. And then we got it out of the House, I think after 4 or 5 hours of healthy debates and fending off amendments. And the House passed one huge omnibus bill. And so you've already heard that the Senate had numerous bills. And so we had to work with the Senate and came up with a handful of bills. The House still had one bill that deals with, Senator Carter already talked about, we repealed LEOBR, but officers still are entitled to due process. So how is that due process, and how do we get citizen participation in that process? And so we created a charging committee where 2 members are appointed by the police accountability boards that you heard are now going to be in each jurisdiction, and then 2 members are appointed by your commissioner, your mayor, or your local county council. And so that charging committee works with, determines if there is going to be charges, and if the officer is charged after a complaint is filed, and the officer says, I accept I accept whatever punishment, then that's the end of it. But the officer can say no, and then the officer can go in front of a trial board, which also has civilian participation on it as well. And I should also say that the police accountability boards in every jurisdiction, the head of the police accountability board sits on the charging committee, and a citizen can also file complaints not only with the police department, but with the local police accountability board. And so you have citizen participation there, and that has oversight over all of the disciplinary actions. A couple things that I think that you might be interested in that the legislation does is we increase the liability caps for economic and non-economic damages for constitutional violations by a police officer. So we increase that to 890,000, which is significant. We said that when an officer stops you, they have to identify themselves and tell you why you're being stopped, as opposed to the rhetorical, do you know why you're being stopped? And so that was important, and it was already mentioned, an officer can be subject to criminal penalties for a violation of the use of force statute. Creating a statewide use of force statute, I think, is incredibly significant. We created, or there will be, a disciplinary matrix that is uniform for the whole state. So right now, all 143 departments were working off, actually, there were no matrix really. So we're working off of 143 different disciplinary measures, and now there'll be one matrix that everyone is subject to. We tightened up the standard for no-knock warrants, which I'll let the chair talk about. You can smile, Mr. Chair. And I'll also let him talk about Anton's Law and the transparency of records that we did too. I'll just briefly mention, because I could go on and on as well. We said that when there is an implicit bias training test that is peer reviewed, that the departments will have to use that at the onset, and then also while they're training their officers, and that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission is also going to have to create an early warning system to identify officers that are bad actors, determine whether or not those officers can be decertified. And so now there'll be a database where you can actually track decertified officers, so they can't kind of under cloak and dagger go to different departments, and determine if they want to do some type of intervention with those officers, retrain them, and keep them on the force. So I will stop there, and happy to answer any questions and let my chair jump in here.
All right, we can go in any order. I was going to go to Senator Huff and then Luke. I was going to go to you and then I was going to start the next round with you, because I've got a whole bunch of things, and I want to make sure that we get to a lot of different issues here. But I hope that all the attorneys that are watching this see the complexity of these issues. I mean, there is, you get what you get in the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post, but this is legislation. And when they started, I mean, what Vanessa and Jill both said, starting with one bill and like 8 or 9 bills, that there was a lot of challenges that you were reading about, and Twitter was going crazy how distraught they were at it, but that poses issues right from the get-go. So I mean, it's really complex, and it's interesting to hear all these things. Senator Huff, on this issue, and I think what we're going to do is go you and then Luke, and then we're going to start really getting into some very specific other issues besides this, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would say on this legislation, it was so close yet so far away, because there were a number of parts of the legislation that there was agreement on, for example, on body cameras, expanding those. And I would say at the outset, I think there was wide agreement from most people involved that we wanted to, and the police officers themselves too, they want to remove bad police officers, want them disciplined, want them out, because they hurt their profession. There's nothing that undermines policing more than a bad police officer. So I come at it from a little bit different perspective, in that if you look at Western Maryland and my parts of the state, we have a lot of small police forces, for example. So going to a cap of 890,000 when you have towns where the whole budget of the town is probably not even $2 million, that's a big deal. And we were talking about body cameras and tort caps and all that. If you're from Baltimore County, where it's one unified large police force, that's much different than if you're Frederick or Carroll County, which have a lot of very small police forces. So that is a concern I have with this legislation, is that if we're undermining the ability of small municipalities like the one I live in, Brunswick, to have a police force, because the alternative to that is they basically hire a resident trooper or have a sheriff deputy they pay. And I don't think we want to go down that route, because community policing, quite frankly, is the best model. And that's my concern, quite frankly, too, about the legislation, is I think it goes too far in a couple aspects. With Leobar, it does keep a number of portions of the current Leobar intact, because a number of them are things that you want. You don't want a sheriff's deputy being fired because they were involved in a sheriff's election. So for example, that was kept in the law, and there's a number of protections that are common sense that were kept in there. But we did not keep their ability to expunge records after a couple of years. I thought that was fair. I mean, that's something I've actually believed on the other side for criminal defendants and people that are charged with, I know Senator Carter's had bills on that for null process and things like that, that we've allowed those to be expunged. And I believe if an officer has an unsubstantiated complaint or a false allegation come in, they should allow those to be expunged. And in the Anton's Law legislation, it would allow that to be made open to the public. And to speak of the danger of allowing false allegations or things that are not true to come forward, you just look at this session and you look at members of the Senate who had their houses protested, and really some of these activists, their behavior. And I don't quite frankly, don't trust them with false records and allegations of police, that they're going to act as rational people with that. I think with social media, and I know Senator Zirkin, when you were chairman, we did legislation on social media and how they were targeting children and things like that. But with that, allowing people to have false or wrong allegations on police and then go out in the public with that, I think that's bad. So I don't think we should do that. I don't think we should treat anybody like that. And then with Leobar, I struggle to understand what was our idea. So in the beginning, the idea is we need to empower the chiefs. And I think the Senate started off with that idea: empower the chiefs to remove and discipline bad officers. And then we got the House version, and then we took an amendment at the last minute in the Senate side that kind of redid a whole lot of the House version. So I was struggling to figure out what we intellectually walk away with that we can tell people. Is it easy to understand? No, it's not. It's actually kind of a complex little bureaucracy that we've built. And I think the problem with it is it's not a uniform system. So I struggle to believe that that Cecil County, their executive, and not picking on them, just using an example, more conservative county, Cecil County, their county executive and their council is going to appoint people, and Baltimore City is going to appoint people, and yet the disciplinary boards and the actions are going to be the same and uniform across the state. I think they're not. And I think the idea that we should have come in with is a system that empowered the chiefs to remove bad officers and then was uniform across the state. And I'm worried that the system we have will be susceptible to basically the area you live in will be dependent on the discipline of the officers. And lastly, I'll just say on the use of force standard, I am concerned about that because they do operate under a standard right now. Everyone across the country operates under the standard that the US Supreme Court laid out. And Maryland Police Training Commission has been training officers on that standard for years and years. And the standard that we came up with, necessary and proportional, it's not defined in the legislation. It's not defined in case law. So I worry that police who have to make a split-second decision, if they have to, let's face it, our police officers ultimately sometimes have to be fighting for their own lives. If somebody's attacking them or protecting somebody else, protecting the public, protecting a fellow officer. And so to pass legislation that leaves it undefined like that really puts our officers in limbo. And my fear is that officers will back off and not aggressively police anymore. And when you have that happen, that's really, policing is the thing that is most determinant with crime. So if you look at New York City in the 1990s, at their peak of crime, really the thing that changed that was they changed policing. And they made all these great strides with community policing and more active policing. And that's really what brought down the crime rates. And right now in Maryland, as we've done this legislation, which has the problems I brought up, we're doing so with violent crimes and homicides on the rise in the state. I know in my county, Frederick, we're really seeing record numbers that we've not seen before. And Baltimore City is still plagued with violent crime, and really throughout the state. So that really encapsulates a lot of my concerns with what we did.
Okay. And finally, certainly not least, Chair Clippinger, thoughts on this bill, and then we're going to move on beyond this to some really lots of other important bills you guys dealt with. So,
well, I do this all the time. I'll do it some more. I want to recognize the vice chair and everything that she did on the work group. And I want to recognize all the work that she did as the chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee, taking this incredibly difficult issue on. We worked on this issue, as the vice chair said, from pretty much right after the end of last year's abbreviated session. And I think came up with a range of really good recommendations that we were able to effectively, I think nearly all of the recommendations put into the law, put into the speaker's bill as it left the House. I'll touch on a couple things. I don't want to reiterate a lot of what's already been said here today, but I'll touch briefly on that disciplinary process. I think that is a really significant and important change that will address one of the big concerns that the Judiciary Committee and I think the General Assembly heard for years and years. It's that complaints come in and they're addressed by chiefs, but nobody really knows what happens at the end, and nobody really has a sense that they had any kind of idea. Nobody has an idea of how the investigations were carried out and what the decision-making process was to determine whether somebody should be held culpable or not. And so by creating the administrative charging committees, as the vice chair and as Senator Carter said, we're going to add that bit of civilian involvement in the charging process that I think is very, very important. We need civilians to be able to look at the very beginning of the process and say, here's the investigation that we're receiving from internal affairs. We're going to look at the investigation and we're going to determine whether or not charges, administrative charges should be brought against the police officer. And then from there, it's up to the chief or the commissioner to determine what the person's penalty would be. And then it's up to the officer to determine whether or not they want to have a trial board, and it'll be a trial board that will be a majority of civilians all the way across the state. I think that kind of change really helps to build greater confidence in our policing as a whole, because I think people will know that those complaints don't just go into effectively into a void, that those complaints are dealt with by a group or evaluated by a group of civilians based on the investigation that is done, and it comes out the other side with a clear punishment on the other side that comes from the chief. I'll mention we set up a matrix for the disciplinary process on the other side that sets as a sort of a version of the sentencing guidelines for different offenses that police officers might be held culpable of. We also need to talk, I think, more broadly as we move forward here from the bills that were passed this year, as to continuing to look at what we ask police officers to do and the skills that we ask police officers to have. In the speaker's bill and in the final bill that passed the legislature, I think we took some important steps by setting up employee assistance programs that can help police officers who have gone through traumatic experiences while they've been police officers, making sure that they get the mental health, the substance abuse assistance that they need to be able to recover from those illnesses and challenges. We need to ensure that police officers get the help they need when they need it. We also set up a scholarship program for police officers to encourage people who want to go into policing to go and get that additional education in criminology and criminal law, so that they are better, they're better engaged and better informed, and so they can be a better police officers, we think. So the scholarship program that's part of the existing bill, I think, is a very important piece of the legislation. But more broadly, we need to continue a conversation that we've started to have with what we ask police officers to do in the first place. And I think here in the Baltimore area, we have a very innovative program that is getting underway. It's called GBRICS, a program that takes $45 million in hospital fees and puts it into a program that sets up a care traffic control system for people who are in mental health crisis or have had mental health issues, so that they can quickly be moved back into mental health treatment if they're discovered to be in mental health crisis, say by a police officer. We want to get people away who are in mental health crisis away from police officers. And frankly, we want to keep from having police officers having to take people in for emergency evaluations, spending 4 to 6 to 8 hours waiting at the hospital to figure out while they do an evaluation of the person. That takes them off the street. That hurts their ability to deal with other issues. We need to make sure that there are those programs set up so that we can do crisis intervention, so that we can get people who are in crisis closer to the help that they need sooner. And so that's another issue I think we'll be looking at in the years to come. There are a lot of the other issues I could talk about, but it's already 12:43, so I'm gonna stop.
Well, thank you, guys. I mean, that was really, I mean, that's 40 minutes of one bill, Senator, or 4 bills or 5 bills, whatever it turned out to be. I'm gonna try to go rapid fire back through the opposite direction on some bills that I thought I looked up all the bills that you guys did, kind of your own legislation and some things you've been involved in. And I thought, you know, for practitioners that are going to get this, obviously we have who's on right now, but again, this is going to be sent out to the 22,000 members of the Maryland State Bar Association. It's on YouTube and so forth. So I'm going to start back with the chairman. There was one bill in particular that several years ago it wasn't a bill, there was a court case dealing with juvenile sexting, which got a lot of attention. And your bill didn't get it, but I see that it passed this year. And if you could explain we're going to kind of do rapid fire on some really interesting legislation back around again. Can you talk about that issue about juvenile sexting and what happened with the legislation?
I'm laughing a little bit because I never knew that a bill on kids sexting each other would be the focus of the conversation or not just this conversation, but so many other conversations.
And I have 2 daughters that are sitting up
I understand.
There. It is of tremendous importance that these things continue to be, dealt with in a meaningful way. So
I understand. The issue that we were seeking to address is that when children engage in the practice of sexting, if they send the pictures of themselves or themselves with their significant other to their significant other, under Maryland law as it exists right now, they could be charged with the distribution of child pornography because these kids are under 18 and these are pictures of children and they're identifiable. So you have that possibility that these kids could be charged with that. Clearly, I think that across the entire legislature, nobody really believes that was what was intended with the child pornography law. So what we tried to do with the sexting legislation was say that if you had people who were, it was consensual, it wasn't coerced, it was effectively two kids who were close in age to each other, and if they shared pictures of each other, then there would be a process where the juvenile magistrate would be able to say, okay, this is a mitigating factor in looking at a child pornography charge, and the worst that's going to come after this, and I don't think it's actually bad, that we would require a course on education to help kids understand that when you take a picture of yourself and send it over the internet, it now is forever. That picture is going to be out there in some way, shape, or form. And we want to encourage them to not do that and to take care with that. So the idea here isn't that we were creating necessarily a new higher penalty. If anything, the bill explicitly says that we're not, they cannot do detention unless it's a really good reason to do it. But I'm laughing not because it's a small issue, but because I seem to have to talk a lot about sexting these days. So,
the reason that it became this is because somebody did get prosecuted for that.
Right.
And that's a big deal and went all the way up to the upper courts. All right, Senator Huff. One of the interesting things when I first got in the General Assembly, all the trial lawyer, plaintiff versus defendant, somehow for whatever reason broke down D versus R as well, which has long since stopped being the case. A bipartisan piece of legislation I know you were involved in with, I believe, Senator Waldstreicher and Delegate Bartlett in the House had to do with, and I think one of the most significant, kind of civil procedure, civil law bills that I've seen in many years was this, and it would be a constitutional amendment of raising what's called the amount in controversy, kind of one of these typical plaintiff versus insurance company type bills. Can you speak to that and your thoughts about that?
Yeah, first, I want to give kudos actually to Chairman Klippinger for taking on that sexting. It's, you have to go around and talk about it all in the interim, but it is a serious issue. Actually, that was problematic as it passed. And I remember it was one of these things we had to pass it as is. And I was glad you did that because unfortunately, otherwise it would be entrapping. And I know when it came up, Senator Carter and I both were speaking in favor of it, that, we shouldn't be entrapping kids who do stupid kid things. Not that they should be doing stupid kid things, but they do. And we don't want to criminalize them. So thank you for doing that. I think, so moving up from, and I believe my memory is getting a little vague here. I think we went to 25 was the ultimate compromise between the House and the Senate on it. From 15 to 25 for the amount for a jury trial. And I think that was actually a good thing for attorneys that it'll make it easier for people to have access to the courtrooms in that now they have to bring in experts and, it costs more money to get in front of in a circuit court. There's all the burden of that. And so now without that, we'll be able to move cases along quicker. We'll get more people through the system, which I know now, especially.
It's actually.
Miss, could you, if you could mute your.
About the statewide. There's nobody.
Slow, Jim. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
That's amazing. She's correcting me. So I think in that keeping more of these cases in district court versus circuit court will be friendlier for the plaintiffs when they come in. It'll move things through faster, which I think is a positive thing. And so I think overall that's a good thing is what that legislation and what we ended up passing.
And so just for the practitioners, it's not going to go into effect until after the next election because it has to go on the
it's a
ballot.
Constitutional amendment. So yes, it has to go on the ballot and it's got to be reaffirmed by the voters.
All right, so that's 1530 for those who do civil law. Delegate Vice Chair Atterbury, I saw a number of bills, particularly as you mentioned, family law. There was an issue about grounds for divorce, which did not make it, and one about workplace violence peace orders, which did. I don't know if those or there were a bunch of them on family law. I thought maybe for the family law practitioners, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on those bills and kind of where we're heading on divorce law as well.
So the family law bill, I believe you had at some point in your career, Bobby, and we actually never talked about it when I put it in as well. And I want to thank the Bar Association for actually the past 2 years for testifying in support of the bill and submitting written testimony in support of the bill. So essentially the bill flew out of the House this year and last year. We could not get it out of the Senate. But hopefully it'll pass. Essentially, if we will join other states in saying if you live together in the same house, then you can get divorced. And it solves the issue of, some folks can't maintain 2 households. And actually, if you are forced to live with somebody because you cannot separate to start that waiting period, it could be a domestic violence incident. You could have children in the house and just the level of antagonism will increase and increase and increase. And I know all of the family law practitioners understand that. So I hope we can get that out of the House and join the other states that do it. We created a new, and I worked with the family law section, a new grounds for divorce called irreconcilable differences. And that was put into the limited divorce as well. And so I just saw something pop up. We're not talking about necessarily mutual consent. The other one, workplace violence bill. This took me 3 years to get passed, and Senator Sidnor carried it for me in the Senate. And so I'm very grateful to him. So this did pass. And essentially, this creates, it gives the ability for an employer to get a peace order for their workplace. And it just incorporates into the statute saying that if an employee or an invitee in their establishment is being harassed or stalked or any of the other already articulated things in the statute, then the employer can seek a peace order. And we see that in a disgruntled employee situation. I actually initially first filed the legislation when there was the shooting out in Hartford County at the Rite Aid facility, and then at the Granite Countertop facility. So now employers will have that ability. And so I think that's a positive thing.
Before I move on to Senator Carter, just for the practitioners, the employee would still have to come in to testify on behalf of the peace order, just the employer could file on behalf of the employee?
So the way the legislation is written is no, the employee could, but it does not. The employer cannot force the employee to testify. So if for whatever reason the employee did not want to, the employer would have to show through other means, the harassment or the stalking, calls or emails or some sort of video recording of the person doing whatever the action is.
Okay. All right. And Senator Carter, there was a bill that I know you put in on workers' compensation. I don't know if you want to speak about that. And there was another one which I saw as I was watching you guys on Sine Die. It came up very, very late which I thought was an interesting one, and it came up late and it stirred some debate about drug paraphernalia decriminalization. I don't know if either one of those but one passed, one did not, is my understanding. You're mute.
Thanks. Really quickly, the drug paraphernalia decriminalization really didn't come up late, but it went through a process, and we got it finally dealt with at the last minute, at the 11th hour. All that bill did is just decriminalize paraphernalia associated with drug use. It's another step in the direction of reversing damage of the failed war on drugs, to recognize drug addiction as a public health crisis and not criminalize people for their addiction or use of paraphernalia, which frankly is legally distributed, but unfortunately the recipients, and sometimes even those authorized to legally distribute, have been arrested and criminalized. I think it's just one little teeny step in a direction of fixing a problem that probably should have been fixed long ago. So again, just that, for the syringe or pipe or whatever, a person would no longer be hopefully accosted, arrested, held, having to see a commissioner, having to see a judge for release, and then being faced with potential incarceration. That's important because a lot of times these cases are never going to be prosecuted anyway. So it doesn't serve any purpose to have people processed and go through the system. We've long since realized that criminalizing addiction isn't a way to fix it. And the other bill, actually, Senator Zirkin, and I've noticed that Chair Clippinger and Delegate Atterbury, Vice Chair Atterbury did this. So let me acknowledge, we miss you as our chair, my former chair, Senator Zirkin. When I came in under 2018, I was under your leadership, and you are missed. Attorneys in the General Assembly generally matter. And so I want to stress, as we have these conversations, that more attorneys with experience need to think about running. We see that we're going to have an opening in Hartford County, according to the news today. But at any rate, the bill brought to me, actually at your suggestion, Senator Zirkin, former chair, the workers' compensation presumption, that didn't pass. But the idea was that we knew that we were in a pandemic and we had our frontline workers putting their lives at risk and on the line. And should they wind up having COVID, the idea was that they would have a rebuttable presumption that they got the COVID from their employment, to make it just easier for them to receive relief as others do under some similar circumstances. But unfortunately, the General Assembly didn't see fit to pass that this year. I guess we'll have to keep a watchful eye as we go through the process over the next year to see how that goes. So that's that that's what I have to say on that.
Interesting legislation. And I'm going to go back around quickly because I'm getting the high sign from MSBA right now, but I want to go through some really lots of, and just an open-ended thing. Back to Senator Huff, you know, there were some things, I'm just going to give you a bunch of them. You can talk about just for a couple minutes about whatever you'd like. There was the Violent Firearms Offender Act, something about medical cannabis and firearms, which I thought the firearms was interesting just because of what's going on at the Supreme Court right now. Preventing or interfering with the report of suspected child abuse or sexual child abuse, which I know that was an issue dealing with the Penn State issue that we dealt with. Classification of crimes, any or all of them, just to discuss kind of what those were about and
yeah, so the dealing with the statute of limitations bill, the Senate passed it, the House did not. The bill basically said that we created a law after Penn State that basically said that if you prevent someone from reporting child abuse, so it was actually on that case, you'll remember that some of the coaches and the higher ups at the school prevented or stopped the reporting of abuse that some of the coaches had witnessed. And so I passed that with then Senator Chris Schenck when I was in the House. All that bill did was it removed the statute of limitations so that it could come up going forward anytime criminally. On the issue of firearms, I'll be quick about it, but the Violent Firearm Offender Act was one that the governor has put in. We've worked it twice through the Senate, and trying to come up with looking at the vast majority of crimes in the state we know are caused by illegal firearms. Illegal firearm is that the person purchases it illegally off the street. And so one of the things that bill did, which I think is important, was, and this was something that last year was actually in the legislation Vice Chairman Atterbury did, that a portion I agreed with on long guns, is that if you hand someone a long gun and you do it knowing that they're going to commit a crime with it, that they should be punished criminally. And so one of the things that bill did was if you hand a gun to somebody and you're doing it knowing that they're going to go commit a crime with it, we should have tough penalties for that. And actually that legislation, when you were chairman, it was then Senator Ferguson brought it in, and we came up with that because you had the issue in the city, they couldn't prosecute because people were just, well, I didn't know he was going to commit a crime. I just let him go borrow it because he was going to go target shoot or something. You know, they were having a hard time getting back to the person that had traded off the gun. And the guns were used repeatedly in crime after crime. They're just handed around. So that's really what my focus was as far as firearm legislation. I think we really need to look at that because as we're seeing the tragedy in the city of Baltimore right now, and just put in perspective, I talked earlier about New York City. New York City at its worst had a homicide rate of 14 per 100,000. Baltimore City currently has a homicide rate of 57 per 100,000. That would make it the second most violent city in America. And almost all of those homicides are by handguns, and they're handguns that were procured illegally. They didn't go through an HQL, they didn't go through a background check. And many a time, these people, the majority, have prior records. They have prior records of buying guns illegally or other violent crimes. And my belief is that for these small amount of people that are repeat offenders and are buying and selling guns illegally, we really need to punish them because that is the most effective way I think we can reduce violent crime.
All right. And I'm going to go back, if I could, to Chair Clippinger. Just so many different issues. It's so little time. I mean, I'm trying to like rapid fire this. Landlord tenant issues, which I know you were deeply involved in, and juvenile justice issues, which are something that's really near and dear to my heart from my time on the House Judiciary. Could you speak about some of the things, just, you know, with the little time we have, about what we did with landlord tenant eviction type issues, as well as juvenile services? You're mute also.
So I'll start with juvenile justice reform. And over the last 2 years, Senator Carter and I have served on the Juvenile Justice Reform Council. There are several other members of the legislature who also were part of the council, including Senator West. We had then Delegate Jackson and Delegate Pippy in the House who were part of the Reform Council. And they put forward, I think, a good set of proposals that would change the way that we start to deal with kids, especially as they are entering into the juvenile justice system. And we passed that out of the House, a package of changes to the way that we would adjudicate those cases. But unfortunately, that's not how it came back from the Senate. We were able to keep $2 million in that bill, and it's pretty much the bill basically extends the life of the Reform Council, and as we passed it, put $2 million into ROCA, who are doing innovative work in the area of cognitive behavioral therapies for kids, and they are working with the Department of Juvenile Services. So that I think will do some real good, especially here in Baltimore City, to help get kids away from committing acts of violence and moving them towards more productive lives. With regard to landlord-tenant, the House passed a range of different pieces of legislation, one of which would have codified the governor's order regarding an affirmative defense in cases related to a failure to pay rent during a catastrophic health emergency. The bill came back, actually that bill didn't come back at all from the Senate, because we quite honestly ran out of time. We just ran out of time at the end of the 90 days, but it was taken up kind of late in the session. We also dealt with legislation that deals with and this was my bill, that dealt with the cost to file a summary ejectment. And the bill, as it left the House, would have raised it from $15 to $75. It would have allowed for a landlord to be able to recover that if 3 times during the span of a year they had to file the summary ejectment. It came back differently from the Senate. We were unable to get that work done. I think we got that bill at about 7:30 on sine die, so we were unable to get that bill done. The shame about that is that it would have also provided funding for a right to counsel that we passed out of the House in certain kinds of eviction cases where landlords were the bad actors. That it would have gotten people the opportunity and the right to counsel in those limited cases where landlords have not been doing proper maintenance, have been refusing to remove lead paint, have been taking action against a tenant because they have found lead paint. It gets them an attorney in those more complicated situations and gets them the right to an attorney. What we were able to pass was access to an attorney, which I don't think clearly doesn't carry the same weight as the right to an attorney would, but access to an attorney in, I think, nearly all cases that come in the landlord tenant realm. I guess it is a step. I think that we could have done a little bit more. We should have done a little bit more, honestly. And I would suspect that would be an issue that might come up certainly next session and in the next couple sessions.
All right. I've lost touch about where I am here. I know, Vice Chair Ada, and I know you guys everybody has to go to their other lives. Delegate Atterbury, just very quickly, there was one that I saw about first-degree child abuse, continuing course of conduct, which I do believe passed. It just caught my fancy because my very first session in the House of Delegates, there was a case that came out of my area from the Rita Fisher case, a young 7-year-old child who was beaten to death by some step something or another with a continuing course of conduct. And the state's attorney wanted to charge them with first-degree murder at the time. And so it was a bill that I put in for Sue Shenning, state's attorney at the time in Baltimore County. And all these years later, it looks like there's been some movement on it. Could you speak to that issue?
So yes, fortunately that did pass. State's Attorney Brave Boy came to me and asked that I work with her office on that legislation. So essentially, to your point, what it does is it says if you have 3 acts of child abuse by an individual, then it can be charged as first-degree child abuse, which was not the case in the past, and the state's attorney's offices were unable to convict individuals, I mean, who were killing and abusing children. So it's a great bill.
And that was passed unanimously, I think, by both houses of the General Assembly. I don't know where we are. Shally, how much time we got left? I'm going to turn to you for a second. I know you wanted me to ask just an open-ended and last question of them so we can get them back to their lives.
Sure.
Shally?
I think if you'd like to go another round, maybe talking a little bit about ways that members can connect,
Okay.
and then I can finish up with Richard Montgomery as well.
Sounds good. Let me start with Senator Carter and just ask, I'm going to ask kind of an open-ended question and then one that we've been asking folks who've been coming on. And first of all, thank you guys again for all your time today. This is interesting because there's a lot of bills, right? 2,500 every year that get introduced. Senator Carter, I'll start with you. The open-ended question is, what haven't we covered, briefly, that like you found to be important, things that you were working on, or just things you thought were important? And then the last thing is, this is all about trying to get lawyers to get involved. How can lawyers best get involved with you, with the General Assembly, with the legislative process in ways that can be, effective and helpful for them, but also effective and helpful for you all down in the General Assembly?
Thanks for the question. I'll be really brief. One of the things I think that affects everybody that it makes me happy, and hopefully it makes all of you happy, is that we created a permanent absentee ballot. So for those people that would want to vote by mail in the future, you not have to request it, as we didn't have to do in the pandemic. I think that's great for people. It should really help people be more included in the process. Those people that, like many of us attorneys, are very busy and take time out to go and vote. We can do it by mail and we don't have to request it. That should really improve, I think, participation over time. Big issue. A couple of bills that I had, I would say, for those that do civil law, I had a bill that I worked with Delegate Sarah Love and a lot of the advocacy groups that created a citizen right to intervene in Clean Water Act enforcement issues in Maryland. I won't talk too much about it. It's a loophole, but for those interested, I'm happy to follow up privately. I think that, we also created some mechanisms for COVID relief, for ways to close the gaps in the digital divide when it comes to education. Not only did we veto override the Kerwin Bridge to Excellence, what is it? The Blueprint for Maryland's Future, I'm sorry. But we also created something called Kerwin 2. And those are good for everybody that has a family or concerned with children's public education. In terms of, am I supposed to now talk about ways to continue to connect? Is this my last shot? I will.
This is your last shot.
So, for those of us that serve on particularly these committees, Judiciary and Judicial Proceedings Committee, and as Senator Huff said, not all of us are attorneys, but even those of us that are attorneys, we don't know, we're not experts in the areas that we don't practice. And so ways that I think you'd be helpful is to have more dialogues, but more education to be accessible to us as we go through the process of legislation and provide input, maybe not only just, to testify at bill hearings, but to really help educate us on some of the issues that we might not all be experts in. I think that's very important because oftentimes, we're, I'm not going to say we're flying by the seat of our pants, but we rely heavily on the Department of Legislative Services. But here you are, experts in certain areas of law. And I think that we could benefit greatly from having more input from you. I'd say, please connect with me on social media, or I'll provide my email address. I'm an active Twitter user. It's my favorite because I think it's a quick hit to get information and give information as well as news. And so on Twitter, I'm Jill P. Carter. On Facebook, I'm Jill P. Carter personally, and Maryland State Senator Jill P. Carter. And I think those are the most important too, but there's Instagram too, and I'm there too, I think Jill in the Senate. I'll write my email address. I'll put it in here, but we all have the same email address. It really starts with our name, and it's either House or Senate at state.md.us, but I'll put it in. And if there's time, I'll answer any follow-up questions anyone might have.
All right. Thank you, Senator Carter. Vice Chair Atterbury, to you, any issues that we didn't cover, which obviously there were a lot of them, and then same question about how lawyers can be helpful.
I think, and I'm not going to go over it now, but the speaker had a Black agenda, which she pushed forward, including monies, 577 million for Maryland's HBCUs, which is significant, which passed the General Assembly. I think in terms of moving forward, I mean, I have the same responses as Senator Carter. I mean, please reach out to my office. I have to say, I literally just saw maybe 100 messages on Facebook. I'm not good at responding to those. You know, they were from before session, during session. You know, if you message me on Twitter, I probably will see that because that is the quickest, but I am on Facebook, I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, but the best thing to do is to just email my office. I have a wonderful aide who stays on top of that. I think, you know, the pandemic was horrible for us in so many ways, but it was also great because now, I mean, you can participate from your home or your office and just have what we're doing going on in the background in terms of our committees or our voting sessions or the floor sessions. And I would also, you know, recommend, you know, if you see a bill that you have a position on, whether it's via the section of the bar or you personally, you know, reach out to the sponsor of the bill instead of perhaps, you know, it's always great to show up surprise, ta-da, you're there to show up and support. But when you show up in opposition, you know, maybe you could have worked those things out ahead of time and make it a better bill. So I would say do that as well. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you so much. And then we're gonna go to Senator Huff, and we're gonna end with the chair. Senator Huff, same question to you. Other issues that we haven't covered, both things that did pass, did not pass, and then also again, you know, the way MSBA can be helpful.
Yeah, I think you know, there are a couple other issues. I mean, I think unfortunately, I think our crime classification task force didn't move forward. I think that was one that sort of got killed off in the pandemic. And I think that was one that would have been very much of interest to your members, especially when you look at criminal law in Maryland, in that we were a common law state. And then we've stacked over top of that all these different laws that, you know, we don't have a standardized system like other states where they have a misdemeanor A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3. And so it's sort of up to us when we're sitting in these committees to look at similar crimes and try to figure it out. But what you end up with is a sort of disjointed system. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done and corrections in there. I mean, if you look at Maryland's assault law, for example, people are always bringing in stuff on assault. We should make assault this, we should make assault that. And I always tell them, assault's a 10-year penalty in Maryland. We're one of the strictest in the country. If you look at, there's like almost no other state that has as strict as law of us. So I think we don't put all those in perspective as sort of where our current laws are and where we match up to other states. And just lastly, I'd agree with what Senator Carter said as far as reach out to us personally. I think once this is all said and done, I'd actually like to put a bill to outlaw Zoom once the pandemic's over. But I think it'd be great to be able to meet together in person with everybody, see everyone. Senator Carter she understated. She's a queen of Twitter. I mean, she's on top of it. I just get myself in trouble on it, so I try not to use it. Tweet at her. I'm like an old man in spirit. Call me on the phone or set up a conversation. I do like to hear input. And I would just second what she said, which is totally true. I was very intimidated as a non-lawyer when I first got elected, being on there. And I was on the committee with Lou Simmons and these great litigators and great minds. And I quickly figured out if they didn't practice that part of the law, we are basically on even footing. So, and I told Senator Zirkin, I said, don't ask me anything about estates and trusts. There's one guy, Chris West, that knows about that. But outside of that, yes, we need your input. Even the non-attorneys need it. And then even the attorneys on there, if they don't practice it, I've seen it constantly in committee. It's a struggle to figure it out. So, and we have great staff attorneys, but they don't have practical experience. They're not, a lot of times they got their law degree and they come right to the General Assembly. Super smart, super intelligent folks, but they don't have the real world experience that your members have, and that we greatly look forward to seeing them in person once this is over.
And
Before we get to Lou Clippinger, I'll just say your seatmate was Lou Simmons. Mine was Joe Getty, who's on the Court of Appeals right now. So I never said a word. There were some really smart people in that House Judiciary Committee. So thank you, Senator Huff, for all your input today. And finally, Chairman Clippinger, anything that we did not talk about today? I know there's so many bills, but things that you'd like that the members should be aware of.
I'll just say, I think that this was a fairly extraordinary session where we did cover a lot of ground, especially in the House, on a wide range of different issues. And I think there'll be a number of issues that will come back, and there always are the issues that we can't get to. And so I'm a little hesitant to list other big issues. At this point, I will say that it's likely that we will, there's a chance that we will take up again an issue that the House has passed a couple times before regarding the liability of private actors in cases related to child sex abuse cases. I feel pretty confident that we've spoken pretty clearly in the House about that. I do think that it's reaching a point where we're going to need to address that issue, to be sure. But I think that there, again, are a range of different issues. And I'll just say this, I do read the information that's provided by the different divisions of the Bar Association on different issues. I appreciate the Bar Association's involvement and presence in Annapolis, even as we did it virtually. And I will say that the people who do appreciate it even more, I am very fortunate in the House Judiciary Committee to have some of the great and some of the most involved and informed counsel, I think, anywhere in the General Assembly. And I'm very, very fortunate to have them and have their help. And they are fortunate in turn to hear from the membership of the MSBA. And it's conversations that they've had for years and years and years that help us in the legislature and help us on the House Judiciary Committee draft good legislation. So thank you all very much for having us today. Certainly, I'll say one last thing very briefly. I'll put my email in there. There is a end of session letter that we send out to lawyers that I think the MSBA helps the House Judiciary Committee send out. I'll include my email there, and if you'd like a copy of sort of a comprehensive end of session letter with issues of interest to attorneys in every area of the law, we'd be happy to send that to you.
If there's any further comments on anything, let me just say, anyone? No? Let me just say that we're going to be doing these. First of all, thank you all for coming on. All incredible legislators in their own right, in their own fields, and incredibly accomplished. And you know, it's great for people to be able to see the complexities of these laws in future. We're going to be having lots of legislators come on and talk about issues. Maybe have some folks from the Attorney General's office talk about constitutionality of bills. You know, Kathy Rowe. We're going to try to get some really good, interesting folks to talk to the Bar Association about how they best can get involved in the complexities of some of these issues. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking so much time out of your schedule, and I will turn it back over to Shally.
Well, thank you so much. And as Bobby said, this has just been a fantastic, we're a little over an hour now, but I feel like we could have gone all afternoon and just really just hit the surface. But I think what this has really shown us is how dedicated you all are with your day job and what you're also doing in Annapolis. But I think really for our members here, you know, no matter what your practice area is, whether you're a litigator or you're doing workers' compensation, you're in criminal, there's something that is pulling you into this conversation, whether it's what you do for work, whether it's something in your personal life or in your community. So we're really glad to have these conversations. And I'll turn it now to our legislative director, Richard Montgomery, who can talk a little bit more and maybe connect the dots a bit for our membership.
Well, basically, thank you everyone for attending. And I wanted to thank all of the members for joining us today. And going back to a session that really was marked by limited access because the grounds were closed, you all went to great lengths to try to be as accessible to us as possible, which was really kind of an extraordinary effort on all your parts. But I also don't want to leave out the role that committee counsel played and committee staffers and legislative staffers in terms of helping stakeholders, the public, and lobbyists like me get access and turn around on things like committee reprints, the version of the bill that the the committee is often working with in late in the process. That's something that, you know, in an ordinary session, I could walk past the committee office and get a copy of it. But committee counsel and committee staffers went out of their way to make time to try to help people like me with that sort of thing. So thank you again.
Charlie.
Thank you all. And as you can see in the chat, our representatives here have shared their contact information. We'll also share out a recording of today, as well as some of the details for the bills that were discussed. And as always, you can reach out to us, to me, Richard, Bobby, anyone that's here. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event, as this will be part of a series. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, guys.